this research project that's still ongoing that the team involved in this are still writing up. So although I'm here today, really I'm talking on and with on behalf of and with my colleagues Maggie O'Neill, Claire Coleman, Morag Rose and Harry Wilson, and we often distribute our labour across very many different sites so that we can share our research and the work that artists have made with us with wider publics. But before I go on to talk about the sort of health and well-being within this project, I wanted to just locate myself in the creative walking art landscape. And this takes me back really to 2008 when I published a book on autobiography and performance, which isn't about walking, but one chapter of that book was about this concept that I thought I'd invented, but subsequently realised I hadn't, but was using in a different way. That's fine. Autotopography. And I was thinking about autobiography in place, and actually all the artists that I encountered who were working with autobiography in place were using walking as the means to bring that sort of nexus together, really. And what was really curious was that all the writing about and all the artists that I came across were men using walking as a sort of autobiographical tool. And I thought, surely not. Surely there must be lots of women artists. And no one was writing about women artists. So in 2010, having thrown that gauntlet down to myself, I collaborated with a colleague who's at Exeter University, Kathy Turner. Can someone just mute their... someone, do you mute everyone, Ali? Are you able to mute folk? Because I can't talk through that, sorry. Okay, maybe give it a go. So in 2010, I got a little bit of funding to go and talk to women walking artists and interview 10 women walking artists. On screen at the moment, there's Rachel Gom with a piece called Ravel in 2008, where she walked through her local London neighbourhood, knitting and walking, and as she's knitting up the debris that she finds on the streets into this beautiful piece of knitting. And as she's doing that, of course, she's attracting attention because it's not that common a sight. So folk are talking to her about what she's doing and their relationships, indeed, their own relationships to knitting. It was mostly women talking about their grandmother's knitting. And so Rachel ravels up this line of knitting, and then at the end, she unravels it back through the town that the area that she's walked in. Another artist, Elspeth Owen, 2005, Loose Link, already 70 at that time, still walking now, still making creative walking work, and very much use walking as a way to connect with individuals. And in this Loose Link, she invited number 0, Kirsten, to give her a message to carry to someone else. Kirsten sent her to Hester with a message, Hester sent her with another message, different message to Annie. And so it went on for 10 interconnected messages. The messages weren't related to each other, and the people weren't related to each other than the sort of one-to-ones. And you can see it's not a linear walk across the UK. You know, she'd walk wildly and vastly there. And all this walking, thinking about other people, talking to other people walking, led me to my own little lovely art project called 40 Walks, which wasn't a research project. It was a gift to myself, and it was to celebrate my 40th birthday in 2009. And I invited 40 people, 40 friends, to take me on a walk of their choice. One of those is in the room tonight, this afternoon, Natalie. In fact, as it happens, coincidentally, Natalie, there's a photo of our walk coming up. So 40 folk took me on 40 different walks of their choice, ranging from, there you are, Natalie, the White Cliffs, the Paris Arcades, up mountains in Scotland, in graveyards, Karl Marx, in sculpture parks in Europe, even across the Scottish border. And those 40 walks took about 5 years to gather up, but it was a brilliant way to spend quality time with people and explore their landscapes or, you know, desired walks or routine walks with them. And it was just the best birthday present ever, really. And I blogged each walk with 1,000 words. So there's 40,000 words. each walk has 3 pictures. It's just a website, but it was just a lovely, lovely way to slow down, really. And I suppose that's all partly to do with well-being, finding that time and carving out that time and space to slow down, and in this case, to be with people who are dear to me in my life. And then in 2012, I initiated a project with another collaborator, Misha Myers, called the Walking Library, which is ongoing. And the Walking Library is simply a project that's filled with books that folks say are good to take for a walk. There's a long cultural history of folk taking literature on walks with them, really starting with the Romantics, where they go off on their big, long 3-month, 4-month, 6-month hikes, and carrying literature with them for company. And so the question for the 21st century is, what book would you take for a walk? So you can ponder that. And then we invite people to come and walk with these books with us. The first one was in Belgium in 2012. It was a festival, a pedestrian peripatetic festival that walked across the north of Flanders with a whole lot of arts projects attached to it. And that was the start of the Walking Library. And there's been different iterations. So the library for a bothy, what book would give you shelter? One of my favourite, Walking Library for women walking, what book would you give to a woman to inspire her? So that's some context. I mean, sort of working and thinking about walking as a creative and cultural practice since 2008, really, and it's ongoing. This project I'm going to talk about now is much more, in a way, seeking to extend beyond artists doing walks in that creative art space and thinking more about the interface between creative walking practices, arts walking practices, and broader publics. And this is funded by a UK funding council. It's called Walking Publics, Walking Arts. It's all about walking, wellbeing, and community. And although it was focused on people's experiences during COVID-19, really the intention is to, what can we learn from that particular context when things were very difficult indeed, and what pertains, what continues, what has fallen away, what might we want to bring with us, the better things. There were some good things for some people, although of course it was a very, very uneven experience. So this research project was 18 months in duration. It was funded during the pandemic, and really it was to understand more about people's experiences of walking during COVID-19 in the UK. It was also exploring how artists used walking during that time. Now, many walking artists, of course, continue to use walking because that is their resource, but lots of other artists who'd never used walking as a practice or a media or an output turned to walking because it was one of the things that they could do during that time. And then really fundamentally, the impetus was to think about how the arts can sustain, encourage, and indeed more equitably support walking during and recovering from a pandemic. And I don't want to use the word after COVID-19 because we're not after it. You know, it's still having deep impacts on many, many people and in very diverse ways across the globe. So how creative walking activity has been and could be used to mitigate social isolation and anxiety, maintain health and well-being, enhance social connectivity, and facilitate cultural empowerment. And really, I think all of the sort of phrases in there, all of the clauses in this sentence are really connected to health and well-being, because social isolation, you know, is a big contributor to ill health, mental ill health. Social connectivity may be a way to mitigate that. Cultural practices are evidenced as having mental health well-being benefits. So in some senses, right at the centre of all of this project is thinking about, I guess, some of the potential benefits of walking in a more holistic way. Just, you know, beyond the 10,000 steps are good for you medical model, I guess. Let's think a bit beyond that. So what's creative walking? Very simply, we've defined this as activities that people or groups may undertake whilst walking, which have an imaginative, playful, or task-based framework. These frameworks add an additional layer or lens of attention to the walking activity, giving it a particular direction and focus. And the image in this photo is of these amazing winter wonderland walks that happen across the south side of Glasgow, probably happen in places local to you too, where maybe it's around Halloween or just as the clocks have turned and we've gone into the winter. But these whole neighbourhoods make these incredible window displays, and that becomes a trail. It becomes a local trail for local people to have this marvellous encounter with the creativity within their local neighbourhoods. And it's quite competitive, actually, I guess, like whose lit up window is the best. A key part of our research was to undertake a big online digital walking survey around people's experiences of walking. But before I turn to some of the outputs of that, I just wanted to put this into a wider context of health and well-being, because our research obviously builds on existing evidence for the general benefits of both walking and art on physical health and mental well-being. Quantitative research, our own included, has indicated that during COVID-19, some people in the UK walked more frequently, but also some people walked less. So there's no singular baseline around that. We can't, with confidence, say more folk walked. Some folk walked more, but others didn't walk at all during that time and gave up walking. So engagement with walking activity was unevenly distributed, but that's the case before the pandemic as well. And that didn't go away during the pandemic. It probably became magnified. So access to walking continues to be dependent on many variables, including opportunity, environment, personal health capacities, and perceptions of safety. And I guess if we're thinking about the relationship between walking and health and well-being, if access to walking is not equitable, that has an impact on access to health and well-being too. If those two things are linked and one of them, there's barriers there, then those are barriers that multiply inequitable health outcomes for people. So that's not incidental. Now, there's a wealth of evidence that walking and the arts both play a role in sustaining and improving physical and mental well-being. And the known physical benefits, I'm sure I don't need to tell you in the room, of engaging in walking activity include, on a very medical basis, including the performance of the heart, lungs and circulation, lowering blood pressure, reducing heart disease, improving and maintaining and sustaining flexibility, boosting the immune system. Also, of course, the benefits on mental health are well evidenced, registering positive impacts on mood, anxiety and sleep. And walking with others, research demonstrates that that can help mitigate feelings of isolation and the negative impacts that isolation can bring. And walking is typically, although not exclusively, and it's really important to say that, but typically it's an outdoors activity. And it often provides for many people a route into green spaces. And so, of course, the third nexus in this really is that spending time in green spaces delivers additional mental health benefits. Engagement with the arts, which can variously involve imaginative, emotional and cognitive stimulation and social interaction, may also produce beneficial psychological, physiological, social and behavioural responses, ranging from and including enhanced confidence, new skills, peer networks, again, reducing isolation and lowering stress levels and anxieties. So if you bring together the benefits, physical benefits of walking, mental health benefits of walking, access to green space, and then the physical and mental health benefits of creativity, just imagine the potential of creative walking, because it's doing all of that. And I think that's what I love about this as a pathway really into thinking about health and well-being, and what can we as creative artists harness and share through our expertise with those wider publics, and thinking really about inequity and inequitable access to walking, including inequitable access to green space, etc. So we had 1,221 respondents across the UK. It was for adults only, so 18 years or over. You can see the demographics of the respondents here. It's no surprise probably that if you're going to fill in a 20-minute survey about walking, you've probably already got some affinity to walking. So there's definitely a bias in the responses here. So it's not a representative data set, but it's rich data, and it offers really rich stories around people's engagement with walking, and more specifically for us, creative walking, because we think this is probably the only research study that's focused in on that use of creative walking by publics rather than simply within an artist environment. This may come probably no surprise. The most popular reason for walking was exercise. So there's a very direct link to well-being. To get out of the house. Of course, in this context, we were trapped. But actually, as more folk have moved to working from home and continue to work from home, I think we need to be alert to that sense of leaving home to go to work has shifted, and that may have health consequences. We may be less mobile than we were. I haven't done a research data survey of that yet. Other common reasons for walking daily or weekly were indeed for health and well-being, for relaxation, also of course closely connected to health and well-being, for fun. And I don't want to underestimate how good fun and pleasure are for us. I think sometimes the medical model of health benefits of walking turns it into a very instrumentalized engagement with physical exercise. So get your 10,000 steps in, rather than actually like go for a walk and have some fun. Could we not use that message rather than do 10,000 steps? And there you are, to visit a park or green space, really important for folks' mental health. And the last one there was to meet people. So that's signaling to that need for sociability, really, particularly in the context of pandemic crisis. To our great surprise and pleasure, the majority of folk in the survey had undertaken some form of creative walking, according to our definition. And the most regularly encountered aspect of that was to follow a thing. So that could be rainbow trails and windows, or art trails that had been made, or treasure hunts. To my surprise, geocaching remains really popular. I thought that was a thing of like at least a decade ago, but geocaching is still done by very many people. Second most regularly encountered was DIY walking art, walking as inspiration. So making your own art or game to inspire you and entice you to keep walking, even when you're walking the same route every day, or even when you can only walk for a short time in those restricted times. Also mapping and making sense walks, mapping sense walks. And then digital, as I said, digital communal games. Pokemon Go still also remains very popular, again, to my surprise. So just pulling some data from across this survey, you can see here, like, here are the brilliant things that the respondents to this public survey told us about what they did. And some of this you can trace back in a way, I suppose, to some of those sort of situationist walks, like walk a straight line as possible, follow flights of a bird, let your dog decide the route. But also, you know, things that are really looking out beyond the personal into the social. Make a map to share with friends and family. Think about how you can walk at a distance but still remain connected by imagining that you're walking together and going to meet in the middle of the miles that you accumulate there. The themes that emerged from the data that was gathered through this large survey really can be organised into two main things: community belonging and place. And actually, I think those are really closely connected to health and well-being. And mental health and well-being as another subtopic within that. But I think they are related. And then other themes did also emerge around working with children, especially during that context of homeschooling. Photography came through as a really major way in which folk engage creatively with their walking activity, but not just photography for themselves, but photography as a way to share and inspire others around them to walk. So just very quickly, you know, some thoughts about the community belonging and place, really appreciating the local, connecting people and building that sense of community in a time of crisis. We were astonished, maybe we shouldn't have been, at just how much folk didn't know their local areas before the pandemic. And then in those pandemic circumstances, were forced to, if they wanted to get out, to get to know their local areas. And that restriction unfolded deep appreciation for something on their doorstep that hadn't been there before. I know that connects very much with your work, Ali, you know, that sort of valuing what's on your doorstep. And I think that's a really important message in relation to folk not being able to have transport to get out, no money to travel further, but also environmental concerns around you don't really need to go beyond your doorstep to perhaps open up some of the interesting things that are there. And maybe we need to rethink beauty as well, or nature. You don't need to go to the park to access nature. It is all around us. So I've spent years feeling the desire to move away, says one of our respondents. Walking through COVID taught me to love where I live. Right, so a bit more of that, a bit more love where you live, because that's probably where you spend most of your time now. And if you can love it, that's going to feel better. DIY walking art and walking as inspiration. We can see how folk use their DIY walks to dig into and be sustained by their local places. You know, folk finding new green spaces to walk to that they hadn't known were there. And I am an example of that. Like, I've lived in Glasgow most of my adult life, and I found new parks that were only 20 minutes away that I'd never walked to before. But here you are. I set myself the challenge of walking on every public footpath on the Ordnance Survey map where we live. This has been great for visiting never noticed landscapes and paths. I also got a much more intimate and detailed knowledge of streets and paths around our part of town. So really digging into that. People took on a very collective community spirit, walking missions, giving back to the local area by improving it as a space for others to walk in. And it's interesting that someone said litter picking. Now, I know Natalie in the room's a litter picker. And so there's a question like, is that creative walking? Well, it's quite task-based and it sets up an objective. So we've included it within that rubric, really. But also what that allowed was connections to other people that hadn't been there. But also folk were testing out accessibility of routes, you know, using that time to explore how accessible routes were for differently abled people. Building communities. The big heading here on the bottom of this slide is small action, big impact. Many of us don't have the resources to make very complex and complicated multi-resource projects. Actually, what was coming through was very small gestures could have significant impact on those who encountered them. So, you know, the painted pebbles that emerged, like that in itself felt like folk were speaking to them from this place of like anxiety, but speaking to them in a way that made them felt seen, really. So I don't think underestimate how the small creative interventions can deliver something to folk who may just need that sense of being spoken and reached out to in those times. But when I talk about those times, isolation is a persistent problem. Isolation is not a thing of the pandemic. It was just magnified during that time. So how can we think about our walking as a way to address those moments of isolation, which have impacts on emotions and lead to depression, etc. Connecting people, really significant through line through the research. That thing about walking the same routes every day opened up new relationships. It landed folk in place, it connected them to place, and in those repetitions they encountered some of the same people who then became familiar rather than strangers. So something about the conviviality of walking practices and harnessing that conviviality through creative walking practices, really. So new friendships were made that hadn't been made before, partly because folk were restricted into those local areas. But again, then, if we're thinking about health and well-being and social connectivity being fundamental to that, again, how can walking be used to harness that and make that more a daily practice for folk, really? Said a little bit about green space before, but this was really a lifeline for quite a lot of people. And they use creative walking as a way to attend to, and more closely, I suppose, the prevalence of nature around them. And that ranges from learning all the bird song in their local area during the pandemic to memorising scent walks. So smelling all of the plants on their daily walking routines and memorising and learning the names of that. Folk also, of course, noted how quiet it was during COVID-19, which signals really how noise polluted many of our urban areas are. Just wanted to put in this thing about children, because again, I think it's gesturing towards something that could usefully be taken forward, you know, into the future, I guess, around what type of space walking affords for intergenerational relationship building, the intergenerational, whether that's familial intergenerational or intergenerations across strangers, and that adult and child walking together, and how those relationships can be upended a bit by affording children the agency to choose where the walk goes, letting them be the creative practitioners. But also, I think, recognising that walking provides a particular space for discussion and dialogue in a non-confrontational setting, really, because it's side by side rather than face to face, and that opens a very different, I guess, relational dynamic for exchange, really, between people. So thinking about then how walking could be used to foster more intergenerational relationships that may again challenge some of that sense of isolation, insecurity, etc. I'd said a little bit about photographs, but this is just a slide that, lots of folk said that they wanted to use photos to share them with people, to inspire them to get out. And so lots of that sharing of the images. And again, I think that's something I've just posted a photo today of the flowers in my garden. So I walked to the end of my garden to take the flower photos, but I'm instinctively drawn to that myself, really. Focusing in just very quickly then on the wellbeing and health, but I think that all of that previously is all about wellbeing and health anyway. Lots of folk talked about walking really being their lifeline during the pandemic, and using walking as a place for restoration, reflection, break, rest, inspiration, self-care, maintaining creativity as a way to reduce the stress. I think really this is probably also gesturing towards the exhaustion of our neoliberal extractive labour practices. I think we're all pretty exhausted, and maybe that walk provides just a little intervention into that labour of productivity, and maybe we need to think a bit more about the politics of the lives that we're leading in a way. Again, we're all walkers in the room, so I think we know this. Walking does help with our feelings of mental health. It does provide a space out of that cycle of endless stress and deadlines. It's quite difficult sometimes to commit to making that time for walking, but people seem to manage that better in some senses during the pandemic. There was a lot of governmental messaging at that point in the UK that said, go out for a daily walk. Feel a bit awkward in thinking that people need to be told to go for a daily walk. Like there's a sort of level of governmental dictatorship there. But I wonder how we can encourage folk to have the agency to make that decision themselves as part of their own self-care and well-being commitment, really. Barriers to walking. It would be remiss if we didn't talk about the barriers to walking. As I've said, not everyone walked more. Some folk walked less. Some folk were very anxious about walking during the pandemic because of their own health conditions, ongoing health conditions. Some folk were more anxious because the streets were quieter and they felt more exposed and more open to attack. Where actually some folk felt safer because the streets were quieter. So again, there's no one response to this. Folk with disabilities were the barriers were magnified because resting places, you couldn't rest, you were moved on from benches, the toilets weren't open. That's just really unacceptable. During this time when folk really needed to be able to get out, and if they were permitted to, there were other exclusions on their way. So, the government needs to take that on board if this situation ever arises again. I'm a big advocate for saying walking can only be sustained with infrastructures of rest built into it. We can't walk forever. Like, we need to be able to rest and recuperate and then walk again. And we also need to be able to decide what a walk is. It needn't be a 5-mile trek. A walk could be 10 minutes and then I sit on a bench for half an hour and then I walk back home. And that's, that in itself is a mental health package, right? But if we don't provide that infrastructure, we are excluding folk from participating in any form of walking. So, nevertheless, the biggest barrier was weather. Biggest barrier to walking in the UK is the weather, which is a challenge for us who live in the UK because this is the weather we've had for millennia, and climate change isn't going to make it any more palatable. So I don't, you know, that's a challenge, isn't it, for us creative artists? What do we do to encourage folk to walk in spite of the weather? Because we live with the weather, you know, 12 months of the year. But work, you know, that's disappointing, isn't it? Work is the second major barrier to walking. Not enough time, boredom, caring responsibilities, don't feel safe, nowhere to go. I think that's really interesting. What counts as a place to walk in? Shielding, don't like walking on my own. Okay, so confidence, capacities, harassment, fear of harassment. And I don't really like walking. That's the one I'd really love to have had more responses to, because I don't know what we do about that. We took these challenges and we invited artists to respond to one or more of those challenges in what we've called walking recipes for walking and well-being. And what's lovely, I know, is that Ruth's in the room and she has one of the recipes in this book. I am going to put in the chat, if I can do that, the link to this book, so that you can all access it. It's a free open access resource. It's in the chat there. And Ruth, you'll find yours in there, actually. And we got lots and lots of submissions for this, loads of submissions, brilliant submissions from artists. It had to be across the UK because of the funding limit on it, funding regulations. And we include 30 recipes in this book, all of which address at least one of these, if not more of these challenges. And it's a little book. Oh, you probably can't see it because I've got that silly screensaver on. It's an A5 size, so it's kind of not quite pocket size. And it is intended as a recipe format. So it lays out the methods, any instructions, any ingredients that you might need, duration, substitutes that you could make, etc. And I think it's a really lovely resource, and we have been using this resource to work with a range of walking organisations across the UK, walking organisations who don't typically work with artists, to, I guess, make visible to them that creativity is something that can be undertaken and engaged with by anyone, and it isn't just the property of those who call themselves artists. But we are borrowing our artists' expertise into this book to then share those creative approaches and thinking about the ways in which creativity can encourage and support more people to walk well. So some of these walks, for example, are for people who are shielding, and they're walks that are undertaken indoors. Some of them are even proxy walks, imagining a walk that you can no longer do. Some of them are resistant to walking. One's about sort of lying down, really, and thinking, you know, and maybe like looking around the room rather than actually physically getting up, recognizing that sometimes folk just don't have the capacity or energy to be able to walk. But lots of them are indeed about going out walking. Now, Ruth, you're in the room. Are you in the room, Ruth?
I am. Hi.
Tell us about your walk, because that's a real pleasure that for me that you're in the room. Do you want to share?
I can do, yeah. Ironically, you just spoke about weather, and I've got a feeling I'm sitting outside watching the rain clouds about to descend. And it actually ties in with your whole rain and walking.
Exactly.
Yeah, I did one based on little tiny squares of the ground, like almost post-it sized, which is based on, I've done my own walking, cycling, long distance journeys. And that's what I carry. It's portable, it's lightweight, and it really affects me when I just stop and pause. It's very different from just keeping moving. And those pauses, it might be in an urban place, it might be somewhere very rural. So it can be noisy, or it can be just really lovely, bird song, everything. And also that thing around fear. Sometimes you might be thinking, oh, I'm not entirely comfortable here. You might change your mind or something happens. So I created an exercise which was kind of that portable. It's easy to do. You don't need any skill, but you just spend a little bit of time just with the ground, really, just engaging through letting drawing. But it is one that, when you mentioned weather, that in running walk draw events, that comes in. How do you do it? I have had to bail at times, or I start thinking, oh, I'll try and do a river or sea or rain version of it. But yeah, there are limitations when it involves others there, because they may not want to stay out.
So you've got the link there if you want. You can browse through Ruth's. And I've been using hard copies. Like every time I do a workshop, we do workshops with about 20 people, and we all go out for a walk, and we surface through quite a few of the quite a few of the recipes. So this is one called Lines and Squiggles. There's no time to read it all, but it's by Lavinia Bryden, and it really is about noticing the lines and squiggles, but starting with lines, really attending. So the mindfulness of that, the mindfulness of focusing on something in your everyday environment and just focusing on that is very calming. As we know, mindfulness is a practice. So it's calming and distracting, but in a useful way, I guess. So taking you out. And we've done this with folk online. We've been in their offices and we've said, just go outside for 10 minutes with this recipe and then come back and tell us what happened. And I think what's really significant there is even in 10 minutes they came back and felt that they'd been on a really restorative experience with this recipe, for example. So and indeed here is some photos from someone who did this at one of our online workshops. They went out for 10 minutes and they took pictures and made a composite collage of all of the lines that they encountered, and then you can see how the lines became the squiggles in the seashore. So not to underestimate, like folks say they haven't got enough time for a walk, but this sort of burst of creativity, really enhances that 10 minutes into something that feels much longer, I think. And then the other thing that we've done is we've used the recipe format to invite up people who we're doing workshops with to create their own recipe for a group or individual that they have in mind who might benefit from having a creative walking recipe. And this is just one example of this, that someone came up with this, and I love it. Changing places, walking someone or something else's shoes, and it says, cooking tip, have an open mind. Be as close to your usual self or as far away as you want. Just be the you where you free your mind of everyday concerns or go a bit further and see things as your dog sees them next time you walk them, or as a different person would see them, or be a leaf. What view field does the world have as a leaf? How do you move on your walk? I mean, really lovely little creative interventions or creative frameworks to shift people into, I guess, a different imaginative place in the world and to reap the benefits of that. So I know we're out of time, so I'm going to stop sharing, Ali, or I know we're at time. That's a whistle-stop tour of creative walking. If anyone would like me to post then a hard copy of the Walkbook, or I can do that, but you need to let Ali know your email address and she can pass it on to me, or Henry know your mail address and I can send a hard copy.
Wow.
Right.
Great, Dee. Yeah, that was really, really brilliant and so packed full of stuff. I could see people like writing notes and I did manage to record it, and so we'll post that on the WTN.
And I know that like Tamsin does similar things, and Jen Southern, so like this is, and Ruth, like I think there's loads of folk who are really engaged also with thinking about, and you, Ali, like walking is a place of a community practice.
Yeah. So I think what you did is much needed to pull a lot of that together into one place, and I think I knew you'd done it, but I didn't realize quite how impactful it was as a resource. So yeah, so as we have fantastic people in the room, would anyone like to comment, ask questions for Dee, start a discussion? So we can run on till about 5:10 because I was late. So we've got 15 minutes if people can stay. Who's wanting to go first?
Tamsin.
Tamsin.
So lovely to see you, Tamsin.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was lovely. I was just going to say that one of the things I was writing notes about is that it's, as you know, so difficult to get funding for walks. Yes. And I've got a big project coming up, which in fact, I think Ruth's probably part of as well.
Okay.
Trying to get some funding for it. So using some of your wonderful, you're so eloquent talking about what you did and how you analysed your findings and so on. So thank you for that. I'm going to try and use some of that material to persuade somebody to give me money to take people on walks. So thanks.
No, that's fine, Tamsin. And also the we've got the report that's on the website. Just pull from the report about the benefits of walking, etc. Because it's all in the report really, which is really helpful. I mean, and also there's the artist survey, which is also on the website. So together that should provide a bit of resource. But I don't underestimate it, particularly now. In these very austere times, how challenging it is to get funding. So I hope that you do get it. And if I can be of any help, you know, let me know in
Thank
that
you so much.
context. Yeah,
Thanks.
it's no problem. But good luck with that.
Yeah. Anybody else? Conchita, did you have something? You looked like you were maybe.
I wrote it down. I was
Yes.
just really so, you know, so many ideas. I mean, I was writing feverishly because we need to do that. Oh, we need to implement that. You know, we have a very difficult time with the artists along the Camino de Costa Rica, just because it's such a rough trail and it's so far away from where most people live. But I think that we can implement. I love the idea of the intergenerational walking. I think that's something so new. I hadn't thought of it at all, but it really brings in an important element, because many of the young people in the communities through which our trail goes leave their communities, you know, and so doing anything that increases the bonding between them and their parents and their immediate environment is just all good. Thank you.
No, that's useful. And I haven't really thought much more about the intergenerational either, other than I think there's something really rich to explore here, you know, through practice, like what that container of walking can hold, or the architecture. Like I think of walking as an architecture really that can hold these exchanges in safe ways, yeah, in safe and caring and, you know, respectful ways, I guess. Yeah. So maybe we can collectively at some point think a bit more about what that might be.
Yeah. Ruth.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me all right? Yeah, moved again. Yeah, it's one kind of following up on what Tamsin said as well on the whole accessibility. And some of the kind of multiple factors I'm struggling with is if I run a walk draw event, it's the funding of it. So there's that issue, and trying to make, say, some free tickets or subsidized when that is your source of income, which makes it really tricky. And because you can't necessarily in person run huge events if it's just you running it. Also, transport connections. Like if I go out into the countryside, beautiful locations around here, but I'm only going to reach people who've got a car. There's hardly any buses now. Toilets, a big thing, you know, in where it really limits where I can go, benches, and of course the weather, which is a trickier one. So there's some, but one of the things I found where it does help with me is if an organisation commissions me to do something, they can then open up subsidised tickets or work out what they do. And also it might have a base. So I can use them as a base, whether are facilities, if they've got an area and they've already got set up some of the transport links. So there's some of the ways.
Yeah.
Also in advertising, just in pulling people in, they can reach more people than I can. So there's some of the things, but I'm struggling. There's so many.
Yeah, I think that's really good points, Ruth, isn't it? Because in a way, it's how you negotiate the relationships between cultural organisations and you as an independent artist, I guess, and how that relationship can be mutually beneficial. I think as an individual artist, it's very, very difficult to manage all of those different issues that you've just raised, actually. Although, you know, if you're raising, I don't know whether you're funding it through like arts funding applications or whether it's simply from ticket sales, you know, or participation.
Yeah, it's quite hard when you're doing it as an individual to get that funding.
Yeah.
If it's an organisation, I'm finding a lot of them, they'd have to go through an organisation in order to issue the funding. So it's kind of things I'm working at different strands, but it's just certain. Yeah, it's a tricky one. You want to do the accessibility and open it up. But also if you're working with different communities, it's like even having to argue your case that you do need to be paid for this because there's so many free events. So yes,
I mean, that's a good point. And I'm complicit. It's like, you know, I am complicit in that challenge because as I'm paid for my job, like this is part of my job, you know, so I don't need to be paid to do these workshops. So I think there's a challenge there in terms of academics, you know, who are practitioners who don't expect to be paid to do this work because I'm already paid. But then that sets a precedent for people not thinking that artists need to be paid. Yeah,
it's a hard one. And then you end up thinking, well, you want the event to run. So do you cut your costs? And then you're like,
then you can't afford to live.
And then if you haven't got the income, you're not putting it back into going to cultural events and doing stuff. So that whole kind of cycle of yeah, it's
And I mean, Ali can maybe speak to that too. I mean, Ali, you do commission artists and produce. I mean, Kinetica does run. I mean, you will be at the coalface of that, like thinking about those relationships, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely will. But Natalie's got her hand
See
up.
Natalie in one.
I
Yeah.
will definitely come in because I've
No,
got.
I'm sort of struck by what Ruth is saying, and I think therefore the role of academics is really to be the advocates for paying
Absolutely.
artists, you know, and I think and also advocates to other academics to remember that. And it's not just walking, it's across all arts activity. That is, it's a perennial problem, I think, with the undermining of fees and so forth.
No, and it's a good point. I mean, what we try and do with these workshops is bring in one of the artists in the area that's in the book in that region and pay them to be at the workshop. You know, but that's just a one-off thing. Like that's not, you know, that's just like, you know, one payment. That's not, you're not going to have much of a dent in anyone's, you know, sustainable living, really. But yes, the sort of ethical practices of these relationships is food for thought, really. See, Juan's got his hand up. Hello, it's lovely to see you. You can mute, and yes, hello.
Hello, yes. Well, first of all, I mean, can I just like kind of like put out for the practicality a little bit just to appreciate all the talk and sharing. I found it very fascinating. I definitely echoed one of you says about like walking like the side by side, which, you know, because I was I was helping them run this kind of performance arts podcast where we do like interview all the time, and it's always one of my dreams to have, you know, the interviewees and we walk and recording together, because I always found it's something magical to just like see things, or like, you know, I feel like that kind of side by side is like less confrontational.
Yeah.
To have the conversation easy to go with the flow. So yeah, that's definitely something
It definitely is, and there is research done on that, like how that convivial side by side, you know, like that. I mean, some folks say it's the same if you're driving in a way, but I think that's less relaxing, you know. But that side by side is a different dynamic of discourse, and that you can, if you're in a tricky point of a conversation, you can use your environment to usefully distract, divert, you know, just to, I guess, use that landscape, I guess.
Yeah. So maybe that's something which I should push harder in our team to let's do something, work together and record on the podcast. And I think another aspect I'm really interested in is in terms of working in relation to the race. Because it's like, I think, because in your slide of like demographic, one thing is noticed that it's like 80% was white.
Yeah.
And then that kind of linking to when you're talking about the barrier, because that kind of like reminds me at a time when pandemic, again, when this like kind of like Asian hate crime was on the peak. I was actually on the planning to have a big walk from Bristol where I live to down to south, but I didn't at the end, because that happens give me the second thought of like, is that safe to walk? Is that, you know, is there any risk? I don't know, is there some perception of the space or landscape that you feel alienated, or you feel, I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know if you have any data or thoughts on that. That's my questions.
Yes, no, nice. That's nice. Nice to hear. Yes, there has been. I don't know that there's any substantive data around the COVID times of that, but certainly as part of this project, we did commission Sheffield Environmental Movement, which are an organisation which supports Black people in Sheffield to walk, and we interviewed Maxwell Ayamba, who's the leader of that, and the folk and folk of that group around their experiences of walking during the pandemic, but not just during the pandemic, because I suppose that's the thing. Racism and people's experiences of racism while out walking, and actually that can be magnified in the rural environment rather than the city environment. Like, that's very well documented. Around how folk are made to feel unsafe and out of place, as if they don't have a right or belong in particular, you know, rural countryside places in Britain. And there's quite a lot of work being done now, I think, to challenge those presumptions around even the histories of environments, you know. But also in the cities, I think the data would show, I don't have it to hand, but I think it would show that probably folk who were most, and the encounters with the police were probably, racially directed in a way. That more folk would have been told to move on or asked what they were doing out, or in terms of racial profiling. And also presumptions of folk gathering, illegal gatherings. I think some of that was probably racially profiled as well. So there is a little bit. I mean, I think there is someone, and I've got your email address somewhere. So if I can send you something that we've written a bit about that, although it hasn't been the main focus of the project. I have to say, it's not probably a surprise that the majority of the folk who responded to our survey were white respondents, because the research team was all white, so there's a bias in my research team.
That's a really great point. I'd just like to come in, because I don't know if you've heard of All the Elements. No? So All the Elements is a network of diverse-led outdoor groups. It's not just walking, it's swimming and bird watching and everything. So look it up. They've now got some funding, because it was really difficult for them to respond to the masses of people that and groups that are there. And they have a once a month social, which anyone can join. And then you can go into the room and discuss. I've only managed to make it once, and it was like fantastic. And there is so much going on now. And I think that really did boom over COVID. So I haven't got the link there, but just look All the Elements, and you can.
All the Elements.
Yeah. So I think there is a lot of progress, and I think it's probably, like Dee has done, pulled together a lot of evidence and a lot of different walking artists who've been doing this. And I think All the Elements is the place where they're pulling together all sort of diverse-led in the wider sense of diverse-led as well. So.
Great.
So I think I need to bring this to a sort of conclusion, and I did want to talk about a little bit about the walking practice that Kinetica's been doing, as Dee referred to it. And so, we are very much, as an artist, I came to walking just because I wanted to walk, and then thinking about how can I do some of the work and use walking in that, and have developed a festival in Thurrock over 10 years. It's just hit its 10 years of walking. And quite a few people might be aware, someone's just joined, that some people in the room will be aware that I've been working on a project called Beach of Dreams since about 2020. And we did this project along the East Coast for 500 miles in 2021. And I literally, about 2 hours ago, found out that we have got our national funding for Beach of Dreams. So it's hot off the press yet.
Hot off. Well done, Ali.
Have been fighting, well, literally struggling with the Arts Council for about 4 years. And the last week, we have had to pull every single bit, like literally this morning, it's like still in the balance. So this is going to be a nationally significant project. It's a national festival that's going to be a National Festival of Walking Arts in May 2025 for a month. And we will be commissioning 8 artists. This is in Scotland, Wales and Ireland, as well as
Brilliant.
And there's going to be lots of different opportunities, but literally we just got over the line, so that's why I'm so exhausted. So it's beachofdreams.org, and I'm really hoping, I mean, the way that we pitched it to the Arts Council after various iterations was that this, and Angela's in the room, I think, we talked about how we really wanted to make this focus on walking arts, and the fact that there has been a boom of walking arts, or artists who haven't previously used walking, to use walking as part of their practice.
Yeah.
Part of it will be a year looking at that, and also combining, definitely reaching all those kind of walking arts groups, working with All the Elements, to kind of just focus on that. And the theme of the walks will be about, in response to the climate emergency in the broadest sense. So behavior change, really, and how the role of the artists are to get people more engaged. And I was on the pilgrimage with Tamsin that walked into Glasgow, and we were talking about it then. So
it all joins. It all joins. Can you put that Beach of Dreams in the chat, Angela?
Yeah. And though I think what I've been saying to the Arts Council is, if you fund this, which is basically gives us a central, it gives me, you know, a years of project management, central digital space. I think that we can build a lot off that. So, you know, if you've got a project that might relate, and you know, you want to do a smaller project within that, I think that it'll really help having this central coordination, and we can pull together all the marketing. And the idea of doing it in the month of May, well, it's the month of walking, but also having a focus month, if everybody's doing it at the same time with a message, we've then got a chance of critical mass and making a difference. And the point is to create a movement. So I really invite you all to stay in touch and with that, and think about how you can be part of it.
Great. That's super. That's a really positive note to end on.
I know, I can't believe it. I've just like been on a knife edge for about a month, honestly.
Well done, well done, well done.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that it's obviously not just in England. So, you know,
That's brilliant.
you be seeing Scotland and Fife, the Fife Coast and Countryside Park, they're a key partner. So there's like lots and lots of activity going on in Fife. So Tamsin, it might be really worth connecting in with that. Sarah Jane Latto in Fife, and it seems to be they've got about 10 different groups already in there. So that's good news, and just want to look ahead to next session. Henry, would you like to talk about what's coming up on the next session in May?
Yes, we have Deb Todd Wheeler, who's on the call today.
Deb, okay.
And she will be talking about grief, a grief ritual that she has developed over a number of years in her community outside of New York. A project called The Lost Pond. It's an amazing book, audio as well. And yeah, really looking forward to hearing that. And then she will also be joined by Adam Skerritt, who goes by the name Mythwalker and has been walking the Southwest ancient paths of the UK and listening to the myths that they still carry, and has also, well, is in the process of producing a book around that as well. So two really wonderful projects to be shared next time.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I think look forward to it.
Deb, do you want to add anything to it?
No, that was great. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Yeah, so those of you that are new here, do keep in touch, and it's on the Artists Talking Walking page of the World Trail Network, and you know that it's quite a good intersection to meet. So that was really valuable for Conchita, who runs the Camino de Costa Rica. So I think this mixing would be really good. So, and we need more artists in the WTN. So do stay in touch. So I'm going to wrap it there and look forward to, thank you so much, Dee. That was so useful. I've recorded it. I'll try my best to upload it. But actually, Dee, if you want to post the actual presentation to me, that would be really good.
Can do.
Yeah, we can share that to everybody.
Okay.
So, right. Okay.
Lovely to see everyone. Have a good afternoon or wherever day, wherever you are.
Thanks,
Bye.
Dee. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks
That's
very much.
great.
Bye.
Bye.
Yay. Hello, Angela.
Hello, you're right.
Yes, isn't that amazing news?
Yeah, that was so funny because I'd known about the decision for a little while, and I didn't know you were having problems with conditions and stuff.
Oh, it was a nightmare. I've been up so all week, right up to like this morning. It was they had phoned us to say that they were going to reject it unless we could prove our match funding. That was, so it went to panel. The panel rejected it unless we could prove that we could get all our match funding in place.
Oh, as far as I knew, they'd already made a decision. They can't reject on that basis. They make a decision and then they can condition it.
Oh, well, oops. Anyway, that was the impression they gave us. Like they wanted it, but because they actually did a phone call. They didn't just give us a letter. They did a phone call and said, "Do you think you can get all your match funding in place by the 18th of April? And if you do, tell us how you could do that, and then we will go back and consider about whether you'll make an offer or not." So then I had to bring everybody and say, "Can your expected move into the confirmed?" And so I convinced myself that I could do it. And then they gave us the offer, but then some very stringent conditions that we had to have £215,000 confirmed. And so then some people said, oh, well, it's not confirmed yet. And I said, so anyway, big juggle. And then I got it over the line on Monday, sent all the conditions
Wow.
in, and then they wanted more, you know, like they're picking up on lines in every letter, and we had to get all
That
the other.
really surprises me. Who was it that you were dealing with at Arts Council? Who was it?
Claudia West, who's the area director for Southeast, I think, or interim
Yeah.
area director. But she was probably under pressure from the national panel, I suppose. But anyway, we've got
I've never heard of us operating like that, because that seems unfair. They either offer you or they don't. But I'm not familiar with that fund. But it's interesting because I'll pick that up with our director because I've never heard of that.
Well, she did say, I mean, they felt awkward on the call. They said, we never usually do this, but, you know, I don't know. There was somebody else on the table, and maybe they wanted to fund Beach of Dreams, but they saw it as a financial risk. And they said, we love the ambition and scope. And I said I was going to raise money from the British Council, but the British Council application is not until the end of this month. And so I can't know until the end of August whether we get it or not. Oh, well, and I was like, well, it doesn't impact whether the project happens or not. Oh, well, you know, you've got to deliver everything you've said you're going to deliver, otherwise we're not going to give it to you. So luckily, Wandsworth, London Borough of Culture, had put the international collaboration into their bid, and so they have 80k against it. So I said, well, actually, I haven't got British Council, but I've got enough money to ensure you that the collaboration will happen. But honestly, Angela, I've just like
no, that's what. Have you told your RM lead about that?
She's been working with us, but when we have our evaluation, I go, how do we evaluate you? You're spending your whole time evaluating us, criticizing us, questioning us, and I want to evaluate what you do to us.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, because it's added stress, and I've never heard of that ever happening before. So that just concerns me a bit, because I saw that the decision had been made. I'm sure it was a week or two ago. That's why I'm really surprised that you've said that, because I could see on the system that it said that it was offered. So that's slightly
very subject to some very stringent conditions. But anyway, we've got it, and I guess we're probably stronger for having got it, because we've had to.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Yeah, I get that, but it's infuriating, though, isn't it? It's really hard, because I'd written regional comments for it and put in a lot of support and stuff like that, which is it goes with the territory, really. But I'm sorry you've had that extra bit of stress. But yeah, it's one of those, really. And then it'd be just nice to get on with it, won't it?
Hope so. I've got to do the British Council bid now, but I've got to go now because I've got another Zoom. But I did talk to you about the conference in Canada.
Okay, well, maybe we'll have a catch up, because I've just put something through internally on my side to see whether or not that's an opportunity for me to get involved with that. So maybe if we could have a call or something next week, have a look in diaries and do a catch up.
I need to talk to Henry. Henry may not come, and if he doesn't come, then I might be able to make you the co-chair of the committee. And if we did that, then you might get your flights paid.
That would make a big difference, probably.
So I'll talk to Henry as soon as I can, and then I'll get in touch. We'll have a chat, because I really need the support. I need someone to be with.
Absolutely, you do. Absolutely, you do. That's understood, and I'm quite happy to take that on board. Right, brilliant. Catch up next week.
Bye. Thank you, love. Bye.
Bye.